everyone. My name is Charmaine Anderson, and I'm here with my group mates Chad Corcoran and Danny Benetti. And today we're going to be looking into prescription drugs and premium increases. Likewise, for this assignment, we chose to focus on the steady increase in prescription drugs and healthcare premiums. And we chose this topic because the increase in the cost of prescription drugs results in higher healthcare premiums, which makes them directly related. So we wanted to look into different solution options that could be posed in order to solve this problem.
All right, and so solution one is ending PBM drug rebates, also known as no safe harbor. So the first part of the criteria we look at is evidence of effectiveness. PBMs, also known as pharmacy benefit managers, are one part of the equation of actors that control our healthcare system and how premiums ultimately get figured out. That equation basically is the research, drug companies, and big pharma. They interact with PBMs to negotiate rebates and pricing, and then PBMs then go to insurance companies and pharmacists who ultimately go to Americans. According to Forbes, ending the safe harbor has a solid chance of lowering premium costs for some people and reducing government expenditures. Most importantly, the aim of PBM rebates in Medicare Part D should lead to higher utilization of low-cost generic and biosimilar drugs, as PBMs will no longer have an incentive to favor branded drugs in their formularies unless those branded drugs compete with generics on price. Now, two scenario analyses were done by Jake Kleisner, Katie Holcomb, and Troy Philippek of Milliman that factor in the potential of these incentives, and they suggest that the Trump rebate rule revisions could reduce federal spending on government programs by between 78 and 98 billion over the next 10 years. And it could reduce out-of-pocket and premium costs to seniors in Part D program by as much as 11%. So reflecting those two conclusions, I think the score is about a 5.5. It has a solid chance of being effective. Now moving on to the next criteria, we look at equity. This solution does not impact everybody in the marketplace. Some Americans that would be unaffected by this potential rule change would be anybody that's getting their insurance from employers, or if you get insurance through the Obamacare run market. But that said, states could increase the impact, however. So currently, states could harmonize their anti-kickback rules to be in sync with the federal government, and that change could filter into the broader private insurance market. And that's according to Forbes. Also, just to highlight how many people get their insurance from their employers, according to KFF.org, they found that in 2017, 54% of Americans had employer coverage. Further on, 13% had coverage through Medicare, another 13% had it through Medicaid, 6% had it through non-group or individual, and then 1% had other public options, leaving 15% total uninsured. And so reflecting that, the score is currently a 3. It's not very equitable at the moment, but there is potential later on for it to increase. Now to the third criteria, potential stakeholder support or opposition. The big players, as somewhat already highlighted, PBMs and related groups are strongly opposed, as this rule change would pretty much end that entire existence of that group. Pharma is in strong support. This is something they've wanted for a long time, and they are completely behind it. Now, interest groups are interesting in that they are mostly supportive. JDRF, which researches type 1 diabetes, said that the proposal was good news for people with diabetes and that rebates factor into 70% of insulin list price. So they were quite supportive of it, as well as patients for affordable drugs. They also praised the proposal for beginning to end the secretive deals of rebate negotiations. Also, pharmacists and related associations such as the National Community Pharmacists Association, they were also supportive. So reflecting that, I gave it a score of 7, which is pretty good. Last is political feasibility. So in political feasibility, this policy solution has been championed by President Trump and his healthcare administration allies. It is currently supposed to go into effect by January 1st of 2020. And then working in sync with that is the Senate committees have already started getting involved to advance the solution and proposed bills. Specifically, they're keying on increasing transparency of PBMs, including rebates, and bills on this matter include sponsors from both political parties and in the House and Senate. So all parts of the Congress are getting in on this, and Nancy Pelosi and Democrats seem to be allying themselves on the PBM side of things. However, they are beginning talks with Trump officials to get legislation worked out. So it seems like Trump and all the other people in the executive and congressional branches are beginning to work together. That said, there are possible lawsuits and legal challenges if implemented. So legal challenges could be PBMs may not go away quietly, and the basis of their legal challenges could be citing possible massive disruption if this rule change goes into effect, as well as unequal treatment of stakeholders within the medical system. Also, antitrust laws may need revising as drug manufacturers may use those antitrust laws to refuse to pass on the discount to consumers. So, also with interest groups, a super PAC known as the Conservative American Conservative Union recently ran an ad praising the Trump proposal. So, given all these things being said, I gave it a 6.5.
Okay, so the second solution is encouraging greater use of generic drugs. And once again, the first criteria that we're going to look at is evidence of effectiveness. So, as a part of evidence of effectiveness, generic medications have been noted as having the potential to benefit consumers by increasing competition and lowering prices. Likewise, according to the FDA, generic medicines tend to cost less than their brand name counterparts because they do not have to repeat animal and clinical studies that were required of the brand name medicines to demonstrate safety and effectiveness. In addition to that, multiple applications for generic drugs are often approved to market a single product, which creates competition in the marketplace, typically resulting in lower prices. Likewise, it has also been observed that consumers do a better job of sticking to a medication regimen if they take generic medications, seeing as though the drugs are cheaper, resulting in people being more likely to get the prescriptions filled. Therefore, the score of effectiveness I would assign to this would be 6. The next criteria would be equity. And under equity for this solution, most insurance companies currently allow the patients to choose between generic or name brand medications. However, they require the physician to write the prescription for generic medications, or you have to jump through a lot of approval hoops to get approval for the brand name. And copays differ for generics versus brand name. Therefore, these policies place a burden on patients with special conditions who can't take the generic and may expose them to higher drug prices. However, Medicare prescription drug plans do cover both brand name and generic prescription drugs. Although because of the hoops that some people may have to jump through, I would score this a 4. The next criteria would be political or potential for stakeholder support or opposition. So, as far as support, the Federal Drug Administration has shown support for generic drugs. With that being said, in the recent years, the Federal Drug Administration has approved a significantly greater number of generic drugs than previous years. Um, Along with the FDA, health insurance companies have also shown to support generic drugs. Um, they support generic drugs over brand name drugs, seeing as though it saves them money also. However, there is some opposition to encouraging generic drug use. With that being said, some stakeholders have argued that the increased short run competition authorized generic drugs might undermine incentives created by the 1984 Hatch-Waxman Act for generic manufacturers to challenge patents incentives designed to foster long-run competition and earlier generic entry. Along with that, manufacturers of brand name drugs have also opposed the use of generic drugs, seeing as though the use of generic drugs get in the way of how much profit brand name drug manufacturers can make from their drug. Therefore, the score that I would assign for this solution would be a 5.5. So, the last criteria that we will be looking at would be political feasibility. And as far as political feasibility goes, this solution has been supported by the Trump administration, along with by insurance companies, and it has been supported and suggested by Democratic senators like Elizabeth Warren. With that being said, the Trump administration has made efforts to lower drug prices, and one of the efforts that they have implemented is improving more drugs. However, I think it's important to note that the battle would be fought in Congress, seeing as though although the Trump administration has pushed for the use of generic drugs, they haven't pushed Congress to adopt these proposals as opposed to just issuing press statements. So with that being said, the score that I would assign for political feasibility would be a score of 7.
Solution 3 is value-based drug pricing. The basic concept is simple. You tie the price of new drugs to the net value increases that drug provides over existing drugs. For example, a new cancer treatment that might not be any more effective than existing cancer treatments would normally be priced very, very high because it's a new treatment. But under a value-based drug pricing system, its price would be significantly limited by the fact that it doesn't provide any additional benefit over existing drugs. In terms of the evidence of effectiveness, the U.S. is one of the only countries in the industrialized world that doesn't use a value-based pricing structure for drugs. The U.S. also has the highest drug prices in the world. Insurance providers and pharmacy benefit managers are increasingly turning to value-based drug pricing as a way to rein in their costs, indicating that there has been some success in the market in implementing value-based drug pricing and bringing down the cost of certain drugs, particularly expensive treatments like cancer medications. Opponents argue that this limits accessibility for patients with special needs. This policy has been in place in multiple states and countries throughout the world, but because of how short of a time it's been implemented, it's difficult to reach a conclusion with the data that exists. We give this a score of 6 as a result. In terms of equity, Medicaid currently has the ability to negotiate drug prices and can easily implement value-based drug pricing. Medicare can implement value-based drug pricing if it is negotiated in Congress appropriately, as currently it does not have the right to negotiate drug prices. This would be a pretty large hurdle to overcome. However, if this would be implemented, it would trickle down to the private industry relatively quickly as they take their cues from Medicare and provide some horizontal equity across the system. This will not necessarily address the cost of insurance, nor assist people who do not have insurance coverage. However, because of how widespread this could become, we give this a score of 6. In terms of potential for stakeholder support or opposition, some insurance providers and pharmacy benefit managers support these plans already, including Express Scripts and CVS Caremark. The American Medical Association supports value-based prescription drug pricing. Some drug manufacturers, doctors, and patients might oppose these measures not because they disagree with the concept, but because in implementation there might be arguments on what the value of a drug actually is and the method used to calculate that value. There's a lot of potential here because it is supported by both the Trump administration and the former Obama administration, as well as Republicans and Democrats. And it's because of its support in the industry, there's promise there as well. So we give this a score of 8. In terms of political feasibility, the fact that it has support on both sides, support from industry players, including insurance companies like Humana, and support from both many doctors, patients, and medical associations, this is pretty highly feasible in terms of political regulation. However, many Republicans on the further side on the right are less willing to pass policies that involve any sort of regulation, including regulations that they otherwise would support, which does offer a hurdle here. We give this a political feasibility score of 7 as a result. Overall, value-based drug pricing is a fairly promising option, but there are many hurdles to overcome if we were to want to implement this sort of policy.
So in order to wrap up our presentation, we decided to go ahead and go over the conclusions that we concluded from what we researched and found out about each of our solutions, and we totaled up all of our scores. So for solution 1, the score for effectiveness was a 5.5, the score for equity was a 3, the score for shareholder support and opposition was a 7, while the score for political feasibility was a 8.5, which resulted in a total score of 24 out of 40. Whereas for solution 2, the score for effectiveness was a 6, the score for equity was a 4, the score for shareholder support / opposition was a 5.5, and the score for political feasibility was a 7, which resulted in a total of 22.5 out of 40. However, for solution 3, the score for effectiveness was a 6, the score for equity was a 6, the score for shareholder support and opposition was an 8, and the score for political feasibility was a 7, which totaled to be 27 out of 40. While all of these solutions were great options, based on our totals, we would conclude that solution 3 would be the better option. The things that kept solutions 1 and 2 from being better options are their equity scores. Solution 1 was just too narrowly focused on Medicare and Medicaid, while Solution 2 didn't accommodate for those who cannot take generic drugs and may have to pay higher copays just for the brand name drugs. So that is the end of our presentation. I hope you learned something from it, and thank you.